The subject for late debate has been chosen, and I will now read, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly acknowledge that this government is determined to jam through its special interest agenda that will discourage the very investment that would create jobs, and that the Labour Management Review Committee process is nothing more than a sham. Submitted by the Honourable Member for Cape Breton West. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of the committees. The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Law Amendments Committee, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. As Acting Chair, Bill number 72, an act to amend Chapter 494 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Vital Statistics Act. And Bill number 93, an act to amend Chapter 1 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Education Act, respecting teachers. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The report is tabled. Tabling reports, regulations. Order that these bills be sent to the, referred to the Committee of the whole House on Bills. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I table the annual report of the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation, could I be permitted to make an introduction?
Oh, certainly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the attention of members to the East Gallery, where we are joined today by a number of individuals whose names I will read, and I'd ask them to stand as their name is read. Krista Connell, CEO of the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation. Vanessa Fitzgerald, data analyst. Alana Andrews, communications officer, and Jessica Gilbert, projects assistant. And I would ask the members of the legislature to extend a warm welcome to our guests.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report of the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to inform all members of this House of the necessary action taken today to remove all responsibilities and authority of the South Shore Regional School Board and transfer it to a new appointed representative. As I am sure all members are aware, the South Shore Regional School Board made a request to the province to conduct a performance review for the board. This request came after concerns were raised about the openness and decision-making ability of the board. The province granted the board's request, and Deloitte was contracted to evaluate how they function and operate as a board. Mr. Speaker, Deloitte submitted their final report to me on Tuesday, November the 22nd. And today that report was made public, and I am tabling it in the House. The findings in this report were troubling and disappointing. Among other things, the report found strong evidence of not only failure to withdraw from matters under discussion, but also of active involvement in areas of pecuniary interest as defined by the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. The board made excessive and inappropriate use of in-camera sessions. It spent 31% of its meeting time in camera, reducing time for public sessions and causing it to fail to meet its obligation for public accountability. Some board members reported that they did not feel they could speak freely without personal consequences. Staff members reported a considerable lack of trust between a number of board staff and members. That, with regard to the school review process, personal agendas of some of the board members appear to have trumped their responsibilities to the board and region as a whole. The conclusion stated, "We believe that the capabilities required to successfully implement the recommendations are largely absent from the board, and success is unlikely to be achieved by the current members, even with substantial outside assistance." Mr. Speaker, it is clear from the report that this board is unable to function in the best interest of students and teachers. As Minister of Education, I could not allow this situation to continue, and today I met with the school board members and made them aware of my decision. This action, though necessary, is regrettable. It was not targeted at any individual, nor was it something I wanted to do. However, nothing is more important to me than the educational welfare of students, teachers, and families. Mr. Speaker, this is the right thing to do for students. The report also found that the staff and administration of the South Shore Regional School Board has continued to act professionally, and I thank them for their good work. Mr. Speaker, today I appointed Judith Sullivan Corney to assume the full responsibilities and authorities of the school board. Ms. Sullivan Corney is a former Deputy Minister of the Public Service Commission and Aboriginal Affairs, has experience in governance, policy making, human resources, and has even spent some of her career in the classroom. Ms. Sullivan Corney will assume these responsibilities until school board elections take in October 2012. I am confident she will provide the necessary stability and leadership to ensure the educational welfare of students and teachers is looked after. Mr. Speaker, our regional school boards play an important role in the delivery of education to our students. They provide local input into decisions that impact their communities. I thank the members of the South Shore Regional School Board for their interest in public service and for the time they committed to serving their community. And I have no doubt that individually each board member brought certain strengths to the board. I know they all care deeply about students and the communities they serve, and I'm sure they all started out with the best of intentions. But as a group, as the Deloitte report shows, they are not functioning effectively or in the best interest of our students. Mr. Speaker, today is a new day for the students, teachers, and families of the South Shore. The work ahead will be challenging, but equal to that challenge is the positive impact our education system has on the future of our province. Mr. Speaker, this process identified a gap in the Education Act. The board requested this review, and under legislation today, the minister has limited power to request a performance review of a school board. It is my intention to bring forward amendments to the Act that will clarify the minister's ability to conduct performance reviews, keeping school boards accountable to all Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, this government remains committed to putting children and learning first. And with that, Mr. Speaker, may I have permission to make an introduction?
Most certainly, but you're going to table that report also.
Yes, and I will do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce Judith Sullivan Corney, who is joining us in the East Gallery. Ms. Sullivan Corney has served the province for many years, including roles as Deputy Minister and Chief Executive Officer of Aboriginal Affairs and Public Service Commissioner. Ms. Sullivan Corney is a parent who has her BEd, but it is her her interest in students and education that will be our most valuable asset as she steps into another important leadership role with the South Shore Regional School Board. I would like to welcome her here today and thank her for taking on this important work for teachers, parents, and students in the South Shore Regional School Board. And I hope that she receives a warm welcome of my colleagues here today. Thank you.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy today's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the minister's staff for a copy of the statement. I received it just before coming into the House, but I do want to acknowledge the Minister for providing that. I would also like to, before I begin my comments, congratulate Judith Sullivan-Corney on the appointment that she has been given, the responsibility that she has been given to administer the roles and responsibilities of the board for the South Shore. I would like to, first of all, begin by saying I did attend the briefing this morning. I did review the report, and as I've stated outside this House on many times, that the decisions that the minister makes and the motivation must be in the best interest of kids. And if for some reason there is something that may be interfering with or have the potential to interfere with those decisions, then the minister needs to take action. And based on the ministerial statement here today and the actions of the minister, the minister is suggesting that it was in the best interest of students that she took the steps she did. I want to first of all acknowledge the good work that was done by the members of that particular board. The minister has acknowledged that. The report acknowledged that. These are people who have given up their time to do what they believe is in the best interest of students. And so we have to congratulate them. We have to acknowledge that. We also have to acknowledge that the voter turnout in school board elections is very, very low. And sometimes there is no competition for board member positions. And perhaps that may be contributing, Mr. Speaker, to some of the situations that unfold. Members do run for election, members do get on school boards, and they do, I believe, have the best interest of students. But somehow, during the process of working together, those things fall apart. And when they do, it is or does have the potential to negatively impact students. When you look at the steps that the minister has taken, there was acknowledgement in the report that this particular board had managed their money well, that the taxpayers' dollars were being used wisely. The budget building process was good, and I think those are primary responsibilities of any board, and so I would commend that board for doing that. We also have to recognize that there is a responsibility for board members to adhere to their bylaws and to a code of ethics. And when board members are elected, there are professional development programs in place because for many of the members, there is not really a true understanding of how the governance model works and what their roles and responsibilities are. So the Nova Scotia School Boards Association has put together professional development opportunities so that new board members can become familiar. My concern with the minister's perhaps haste in making the decision she made is that if the board had recognized that they were not functioning well, I would have hoped they would have taken advantage of an opportunity, if it had been provided for them, to try to resolve their differences, to try to look at better ways of working together. That may not have been successful, but perhaps it's premature to suggest in the Deloitte report pretty strong language that they did not believe that would happen. I would have preferred the board members had an opportunity, and if they took advantage of that and were still not able to function, then absolutely the minister can go in and do what she did. I would also have a concern that the responsibility for administering the board is now in the hands of one person. And some people may remember what happened a few years ago when the Education Act only allowed the minister to give the responsibility to one person. And much of the criticism that came at that time was that that responsibility should not have been limited to one. So the Education Act was changed, and it now reads one or more persons. I guess I would have asked the minister if she considered one or more persons to assume the responsibility. We do have someone who has been asked to do that. I do wish her well. I believe that with the strong staff that exists in that particular board, that the impact of this decision will be that the students will be sheltered from anything that may happen as a result of this decision, and that the teaching and learning in the classrooms in South Shore Board will continue to be top-notch. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take the time to thank the Minister for providing me with an advanced copy of her statement today. I would also like to express my appreciation for the comments made by my colleague in the official opposition. Also, I want to congratulate Ms. Sullivan-Corney on her appointment. Elected officials at all levels of government are servants of the public. They, like all of us here in this House, have a duty and a responsibility to hold themselves to a higher standard. Transparency and accountability are not behaviours that elected officials should exemplify. They are behaviours that elected officials must exemplify. But sometimes this does not happen for whatever reason. The Minister notes the report found strong evidence of not only a failure to withdraw from matters under discussion, but also of active involvement in areas of pecuniary interest defined by the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Judging by her actions today, I know the Minister takes conflict of interest violations seriously. I can assure her the members of the Progressive Conservative Caucus do too. I think all members of the House know that when an individual is involved in multiple interests, one could possibly be corrupted by the motivation for personal fulfillment or enrichment. We cannot allow these conflicts to exist in our school system. We cannot allow them to exist anywhere. The future of our young people is at stake. We need to ensure our school boards are working to provide the highest quality education possible for students in Nova Scotia. There is no room for missed opportunities and no room for underperformance in the education system, be it teachers in the classroom or elected representatives on the board. The Minister has indicated she intends to bring forward amendments to the Act that will clarify the Minister's ability to conduct performance reviews and keep school boards accountable to Nova Scotians. I can assure the Minister I look forward to seeing her suggestions and working with her in the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day, I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas youth from across the province entered their stories and poems in a creative writing contest held by the Office of African Nova Scotian Affairs this summer in celebration of the International Year for People of African Descent. And whereas honorary contest judge Lawrence Hill, author of the award-winning bestseller, The Book of Negroes, selected 6 winners in 2 age categories, were first place in the age 13-17 category going to Sarah Frame of Fall River. Second place to Chantel Arbuckle of Halifax, and third place to Isria Fitch of Canning. First place in the age 18 to 22 category to Jennifer D. Yarman of Truro. Second place to Elijah Mazik Kelly of Halifax, and third to Carl Fritz of Bible Hill. And whereas Mr. Hill commented the winners on their depth, creativity, and uncommon wisdom in fighting about the experiences of persons of African descent. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate the winners of the creative writing contest. Thank all of the young writers who took the time to enter and encourage them to continue their great creative work. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. Thanks, Ivan.
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill number 118, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I make an introduction?
Oh, certainly.
Thank you. In the West Gallery today is Mr. Richard Grant, who is the president of Halifax-based Grantech Engineering Consultants. He is a well-known strong advocate for a national offshore safety regulator. He's vice chair of the Strategic Steering Committee on Offshore Structures, chair of the Fixed Steel and Topsides Working Group of the Canadian Advisory Committee on Offshore Structures, and the Canadian representative on the Working Group for Fixed and Steel and Topside Structures. He was awarded the 2010 Lieutenant Governor's Award for Engineering Excellence, and he has 25 years experience in this area, including work as the principal structural analyst for the design of the Canadian Navy's maritime coastal defense vessels. And finally, I might add as an interesting note, he was also involved at Oak Ridge Laboratory in the Spitalian neutron source, which is, according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the most powerful neutron source in the world. So, Mr. Speaker, if the members would like to give him a warm welcome, and we're all privileged to have him here.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoy today's proceedings. I will now recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulating body on offshore petroleum safety standards.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulating body of offshore petroleum safety standards.
Bill number 119, entitled An Act to Require the Government of Nova Scotia to enter into negotiations with the Government of Canada to create a federal regulating body on offshore petroleum safety standards.
Order the bill be read a second time on a future day. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for the Liquor Control Act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Liquor Control Act begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statute 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
Bill number 120, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
Order that the bill be read a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that in a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on November 24th, 2011, White Point Beach Resort was presented with the top prize for human resource development at this year's Canada Tourism Leadership Summit. And whereas this award recognizes the commitment made by this resort and the tourism workforce through professional recognition, training, and excellence in human resource management.
That's the last one.
And whereas this 83-year-old tourism icon, which has been known to employ over 150 people during the peak summer months, will be rebuilding its main lodge, which was lost during a fire just a few weeks ago. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature extend our congratulations to Danny Morton and the staff at White Point Beach Resort on receipt of this prestigious award, and wish them success in rebuilding their landmark to its former glory. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas a significant number of students across Nova Scotia do not receive the nutrition needed to perform the best of their ability in school and extracurricular activities, and whereas Feed the Students is an initiative to provide free lunch once a month to hundreds of students attending Cole Harbour District High School, while also promoting change and healing between young people and local law enforcement, And whereas this is the third year that officers from the Cole Harbour and Preston RCMP have offered the lunch program at the high school, therefore be it resolved, the members of the House recognize and thank these officers for providing students at Cole Harbour District High School with a nutritious lunch while also building stronger, safer communities by strengthening the relationship with the young people in the areas they patrol. Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this is an historic week for Egyptians as they line up peacefully and in great numbers to cast ballots in the country's first election following the uprising of last spring. And whereas the people of Egypt have had a turbulent year of unrest, and this first in a series of 3 elections is a major step towards restoring a government and redefining the political structures of the country. And whereas the Egyptian community here in Halifax is hopeful that these elections will provide the foundation for a government that is committed to the principles of democracy and the rule of law, including the importance of protecting minority rights and freedoms. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this Assembly acknowledge the importance of these elections and express our hope that the future will be politically stable and the resulting government will be democratic and will respect the rights of its citizens. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the ability to actively participate in our economy and contribute as a productive member of our community becomes much more meaningful and important when faced with a personal challenge. And whereas the Queen's Association for Supportive Living in Queens County is a dynamic organization which strives to meet the challenges that confront individuals in our community through programs designed to foster personal growth and independence. And whereas the Riverbank General Store in Mill Village, Queens County, operated by the Queen's Association for Supported Living, celebrated its grand opening on August the 9th, 2011, with the goal and vision to make a difference in the community while providing work-related skills to its employees in a retail setting, which also includes a cafe and gift shop. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes and congratulates the Riverbank General Store and its employees for their contribution to the community of Mill Village and its economy. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Wayne Olton family of W.G. Olton and Sons Limited of Martock have been named Environmental Farm Stewards of the Year by the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, and whereas the Oltons are well known for their hard work and dedication in making their family farm greener with less labor and employ 16 full-time and 10 seasonal workers, and whereas the W.G. Olton family farm includes mixed livestock, orchards, woodlots, and on-site abattoir, and is a 4th-generation farm with a mission. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate W.G. Olton Farm, a family farm of Martock, Hants County, for being such wonderful ambassadors of agriculture in this province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was wondering if I could do an introduction before I do my resolution, sir.
Most certainly.
Joining us in the East Gallery today are a number of important people. I'm not going to introduce them in order of priority because I'm going to leave the most important man to the last. First of all, we have Kent Gilbert and Ann McCollum here. We also have Scott and Margaret Gilbert. I'd ask them to stand, if they would, as I call their names. And I've left one person to the end. That is Max Gilbert, who is a BLT student that you will hear of in a moment. He is Maritimer of the Week, But more importantly, I have some details. So if you could recognize these folks, the grandparents and parents of Max Gilbert. Ladies and gentlemen.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Now, Max, I used to be a teacher, so you make those other people sit down and you should continue to stand, please. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas thousands of men from Canada and around the world are sporting mustaches for Movember to raise funds and awareness for men's health, specifically prostate cancer. And whereas Max Gilbert, grade 4 student from Beachville Lakeside Timberley Elementary School, had the idea to make felt mustaches so children and women could show their support for Movember. Whereas in recognition of Maxwell's extraordinary efforts, making more than 1,500 mustaches, raising more than $3,000, Beachville Lakeside Timberley Elementary School declared November the 15th Mustache Day at BLT. Wow. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly recognize Max Gilbert for raising funds and awareness for men's health and setting an excellent example for students across this province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Bedford, Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Kinsman Club of Sackville is celebrating 50 years of service in the community, and whereas for 50 years the Kinsmen have raised funds through jogathons, Christmas tree sales, car shows, Monte Carlo nights and bingos, and whereas the Kinsmen have been instrumental in the realization of community projects such as the Sackville Sports Stadium pool, have supported charities like cystic fibrosis, multiple sclerosis, and the Children's Trust Fund, and are currently involved in the creation of the Murdoch McKay Memorial Kinsman Park at First Lake. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly applaud the work of the Kinsmen and wish them many more successful years contributing to their community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Excellence in Teaching Awards are sponsored by the Chignecto Central Regional School Board and the Nova Scotia Teachers Union, and whereas these awards are presented annually to recognize outstanding teachers and to celebrate teaching excellence within the board, and whereas Jennifer Lyons of North Colchester High School in Tatamagouche was a winner of the 2011 Excellence in Teaching Award, therefore be it resolved all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Jennifer for winning this prestigious award and thank her for her exceptional effort to provide a learning environment that ensures the best in education for all her students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas power rates have soared even higher while this NDP government has done nothing to stop the climb. Whereas the NDP government has refused to take tax on gasoline, a tax that the Premier called an immoral tax while in opposition. Whereas the NDP hiked the HST, broke a promise to municipalities regarding the MOU putting up property taxes, broke promises to taxpayers to end income tax bracket creep, and hiked over 1,400 users' fees outside this legislature. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House of Assembly urge the NDP government to abandon their attempt to tax Nova Scotians into submission and make life unaffordable, and recommend that the NDP rethink the broken promise to the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear several noes. The motion is tabled. The Honourable Member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Matthew Muse of Southwest Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation Incorporated offers physiotherapy services to the Tri-Counties, support to local events and groups, and volunteers his time with seniors in our community and the Special Olympics. And whereas on November 23rd, 2011, the Yarmouth and Area Chamber of Commerce held its annual Business Awards banquet, and whereas Matthew Muse of Southwest Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation Incorporated received the Entrepreneur of the Year award, therefore be resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate my friend Matthew Muse on receiving the Yarmouth and Area Chamber of Commerce Business Award for Entrepreneur of the Year and thank him for his contributions to health and well-being in our community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and pass the vote debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. I will now recognize the honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Wendy Balzer is no stranger on the golf course of this province, and whereas Wendy won the two-day club championship on July the 23rd and 24th at the Digby Pines, and whereas Wendy then moved on to win the SNGA Women's Two-Ball Championship on July the 27th at the Annapolis Royal Golf Club. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Wendy Balzer on her outstanding achievements in golf and wish her continued success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against? Motion is carried. The honourable member for Colchester North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas over 40,000 student athletes participate annually in school sport programs throughout the province, and whereas the Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation annually organizes the celebration of school sport to honour participation, fair play and service to school sport, and to reinforce the significant role interscholastic athletics plays in education, and whereas each school chooses a female and male student athlete and a coach who exemplifies the qualities the NSSAF strive to develop through participation in school sports. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly congratulate Jody Upham, a coach at Central Colchester Junior High School in Colchester North, for being the recipient of the 2011 Nova Scotia School Athletic Federation Sport Award for coaches. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Tremont World's Fair will celebrate 75 years on September 1st, 2012, and whereas the Tremont's World Fair has been called the biggest little agriculture fair in Nova Scotia, and whereas a dedicated group of community-minded, hard-working individuals have successfully planned 74 years of fun and activities for the entire family, therefore be it resolved that this House congratulate the small rural community of Tremont as they prepare for their 75th Tremont World's Fair in 2012. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas IMO Foods exports its products to many countries around the world and has been in business for 43 years while employing 65 people and also providing financial support for other community activities. And whereas on November 23rd, 2011, the Yarmouth Area Chamber of Commerce held its annual Business Awards banquet, and whereas Phil LeBlanc of IMO Foods received the Export Achievement Award, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Phil LeBlanc of IMO Foods on receiving the Yarmouth Area Chamber of Commerce Business Award for Export Achievement and thank him for his contributions to business and his community. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. That's it. Whereas the lobster industry of Nova Scotia is both a cultural and economic pillar of our coastal communities and across our province. And whereas today, November the 29th, is dumping day for the lobster industry in southwest Nova, and whereas hundreds of boats left harbors across southwest Nova Scotia early this morning to begin their winter season, therefore be it resolved that all members of the legislature extend our well wishes and prayers for a great season and safe fishing to all those aboard the boats headed out today. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. It is now time for oral questions put by members to ministers. The time is now 12:50. We will go until 1:50. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Today, the Utility Review Board delivered its decision on the general rate increase application for Nova Scotia Power. Mr. Speaker, residential customers now face an increase of 6.1% beginning January 2012. Mr. Speaker, the Premier remained silent on this issue all year, and now Nova Scotians are faced with higher power bills yet again. My question for the Premier: will the Premier overturn the decision by the URB to increase residential power rates by 6.1%?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, honest to goodness, I can't think of anything that would be worse than the politicization of an independent board that is supposed to look after the fair interests of the people of this province. Mr. Speaker, that would be an unprecedented mistake, and I'm sure it's not what the Leader of the Opposition means to suggest. Mr. Speaker, the decision is a difficult one for ratepayers, and you know, we thoroughly understand that. That is why, as this government that recognized that it is a necessity of life, it's why we took the HST off of home energy costs, Mr. Speaker. But this is what happens when, for a decade, you ignore the responsibility that you have to reframe the energy landscape in this province. This is what happens when you allow a utility to continue to be chained to the international fossil fuel markets, Mr. Speaker, which is why this government is ensuring that that does not happen in future.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Speaker, that will be cold comfort to Nova Scotians who are faced with the reality of a 6.1% increase in their power bills this year. Mr. Speaker, as if 6.1% wasn't enough of a burden for homeowners to bear in the new year, they will also carry the NDP electricity tax, set to rise again in January 2012, Mr. Speaker. The DSM charge, which the NDP didn't support in opposition, now, Mr. Speaker, is creating an even greater burden on the ratepayers. So my question to the Premier: will the government freeze the DSM charge so ratepayers will not have to pay an increased NDP electricity charge?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is, attempting to cloud these things by talking about a demand-side management charge, which of course this government had nothing to do with. And what's more important here, Mr. Speaker, is the question of what it is that the opposition is suggesting. They are suggesting that nothing happened on the electricity side, Mr. Speaker. It is in fact the programming that is put in place through that charge, through Efficiency Nova Scotia, which allows consumers to be able to reduce their energy costs and therefore reduce the overall cost of energy in their household. For whatever reason, the members opposite are opposed to energy efficiency. They are opposed to ensuring that consumers are able to spend less on their power, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
No, Mr. Speaker, we believe shareholders should pay that. Unlike the Premier, we're not flip-flopping on our position. Mr. Speaker, with the general rate increase, the NDP electricity tax, and Nova Scotia ratepayers will be faced increases associated with the fuel adjustment mechanism. It's simply too much for Nova Scotians to bear, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier has done nothing to truly address power rates in Nova Scotia. My question to the Premier: when can Nova Scotians expect their government to stand up for them and not Nova Scotia Power?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, fortunately, Mr. Speaker, the people of Nova Scotia have a government that is standing up for them, getting them off of the roller coaster of fossil fuels, Mr. Speaker, signing agreements with Newfoundland and Labrador to access the Lower Churchill power project, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that we have a renewable electricity plan that reduces our dependence on fossil fuels, Mr. Speaker, and making sure that the HST comes off of home energy costs. And Mr. Speaker, I would point out that something that actually saves ratepayers money is something that the opposition voted against.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today's UARB decision means that Nova Scotians are going to pay on average 5.6% more for power, in addition to the 3.2% previously approved under the fuel adjustment mechanism. It was confirmed today, Mr. Speaker, that everyone is going to pay more. Everyone's bill is going up. We cannot go on like this. Will the Premier commit today to reviewing his bite-the-bullet electricity plan that has all Nova Scotians paying more?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, if there were ever a time for the Leader of the Conservative Party to apologize to the people of Nova Scotia, it would be today. Because the simple fact of the matter is that the reason why we find ourselves in the position where the Utility Review Board has to make this decision is because for a decade, the former Conservative government refused to engage in a renewable electricity plan, Mr. Speaker, that would get Nova Scotians off of fossil fuels and prevent the kind of roller coaster that we have seen in power rates that is directly attributable to the decisions of the past governments, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the only apology that's due here is the Premier's for the escalator, the ever-upgoing escalator that he has put Nova Scotians on, starting with Nova Scotia households, who today are facing a 6.1% increase in their rates on top of the 3.2% that was previously approved, Mr. Speaker, over 9% for every Nova Scotia household, whether you're a senior on a fixed income, a single-parent family, every single household has their power rates going up and up and up. So will the Premier explain to all of those who are struggling with this escalator of power rates why he insists on sticking to his bite-the-bullet electricity plan?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, our electricity plan is designed to get the people of Nova Scotia off of fossil fuels, to reduce our dependency on the international fossil fuel markets, so that we will have stable long-term energy rates, Mr. Speaker. That is something that the previous government refused to do, and as a result, the cost of coal, which of course is directly reflected in our rates, has risen 75%, Mr. Speaker. That is as a result of the decisions made by the former government.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even after all the work of the UARB, industrial manufacturers like Bowater, like NewPage, they'll still be paying over $60 per megawatt hour for their electricity, Mr. Speaker. The workers at Bowater, under excruciating circumstances, have done their part. The monitor at NewPage is doing his part to find a buyer that will operate that mill as a going concern. Why won't the Premier do his own part and rewrite his bite-the-bullet plan so that Nova Scotians can get a break?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what plan the member is referring to, except to say that we have a renewable electricity plan, which means that this province will have stable long-term rates. Mr. Speaker, if we heard one thing from businesses, it is that that is the right direction to go in, and they are commending this government for it. And Mr. Speaker, we continue to go in that direction because it's simply best for residential ratepayers and for businesses in the province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the URB has also delivered their decision with respect to NewPage and Bowater. raising the rates for the general rate application and further increasing power bills across the board, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the URB has stated that the increase to all other customers is worth it and less expensive than having Newpage and Bowater go off the grid. My question to the Premier, does the Premier agree with the decision?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I agree that the Utility and Review Board has done its job in terms of considering the range or the balance of interests that exist in the province. Mr. Speaker, what I disagree with, of course, is the question of why it is that we are forced to accept these kinds of rate increases. That happens because, Mr. Speaker, past governments refused to get us off of fossil fuels, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the board only offered a 3-year load retention rate rather than the 5-year application that the mills were asking for. So in a strange way, well, this is a concession for the ratepayers. It is a blow to the mills. The mills don't get what they want, Mr. Speaker, but the ratepayers are getting higher power bills, and nobody wins. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, considering that both Newpage and Bowater have stressed very strongly that they needed the load retention rate to stay in business, what is the Premier going to do to make sure those mills continue to operate?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can tell the Leader of the Opposition is that we are in, of course, active negotiations and talks with Bowater. They have a whole series of issues, but interestingly enough, one of the things that they're looking at very closely is the question of energy efficiency, Mr. Speaker, the question of how they go about actually reducing their power costs by reducing energy consumption. Mr. Speaker, that is a concept, of course, that is directly, applicable to residential ratepayers as well. It's one of the reasons why we want to see a comprehensive, across-the-board energy efficiency program that will help people spend less on energy.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, strangely enough, both of these mills pay the DSM charge, yet do not have access to that money to create the energy efficiency that the Premier has been talking about. Mr. Speaker, this decision sets a dangerous precedent for Nova Scotians. As you know, this decision applies to the 2 largest industrial users in the province. But as all Nova Scotians know, there are other industrial users across Nova Scotia, from Sobeys to Bragg, Oxford Frozen Foods, and the list goes on, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the Premier, how will the Premier address this matter now that the precedent has been set by the URB yet today, and make sure that all Nova Scotia businesses have access to fair power rates?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when Nova Scotia Power was privatized and when Emera was set up under, well, at one point the Conservative government and then later on the Liberal government, one of the things they did, of course, is they put in place a regime under the Utility and Review Board to regulate the interests that are at play in the province. So, Mr. Speaker, if people during rate hearings make applications to the Utility and Review Board, they will consider those applications.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Mr. Speaker, my question for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Management Review Committee has been tasked to study the labour relations issues in the province and consult with stakeholders, both union and non-union, Mr. Speaker, on how best to address labour issues in the province. On September 23rd, the Labour Management Review Committee held a study day to look at the settlement of first contracts. Over 55 unionized and non-unionized groups came together as stakeholders to look at this policy and to consider the implications that it would have on their respective organizations. So my question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier table in this House today a list of the organizations that were invited to participate in that study day?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously I don't have a copy of any such list, but Mr. Speaker, I'll make the appropriate inquiries and see if it's available.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Sobeys, a proud Nova Scotia company, employs approximately 10,000 people in our province. As the largest private sector employer with substantial operations based in Nova Scotia, Sobeys is a mainstay when it comes to the Nova Scotia businesses, Mr. Speaker. However, Sobeys was not invited to attend the Labour Management Review Committee study day on first contract arbitration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, how can this government claim that the Labour Management Review Committee is undertaking a fulsome consultation when the biggest employer in this province isn't even invited to the study day on a policy that could have great impact on its operations and future investments in this province?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, we go out of our way to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible to ensure that we hear from Nova Scotians from one end of the province to the other, from every element of the business community. As I said earlier, I am not aware of who all was invited or how those invitations would have went out, but certainly, of course, the paper was posted online for everyone to see and for everyone to comment on, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the Premier can appreciate the frustration businesses are feeling. Here we have the largest single private sector employer in the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and the Premier or his government or the three MLAs that represent Pictou County would not call them and invite them to participate in a study day on a piece of legislation that will have a great impact on their business, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Management Review Committee left Sobeys, the province's largest employer, out of this study day and a policy that could have a profound impact on Sobeys' future investment and job creation here in the province of Nova Scotia. The Labour Management Review Committee has no non-union representation, Mr. Speaker. It is making decisions that have a direct impact on non-unionized workplaces, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, how can a committee with no representation from non-union workplaces objectively consider labour policies that will greatly affect major employers and not even invite Sobeys, the largest private sector employer in the province of Nova Scotia, to this country?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we did hear from representatives on behalf of the non-unionized sector, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, this legislation, in fact, does not apply to non-unionized locations, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I don't think they've read the bill, Mr.
Order,
Speaker.
please,
they asked questions about it. But...
Order. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, this legislation that he's referring to does not apply to non-union shops, Mr. Speaker. But I'll ask the Minister of Labour to address more directly the question that was asked with respect to who was invited to the study day and who replied or responded to the invitations.
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this opportunity to clarify a couple of things. Certainly, representatives of the business organizations, the umbrella groups, and a few individual business representatives were invited to the study day. And in fact, many of them, several of them, indicated that they were not able to attend. And so I met with those representatives earlier in the week before the study day, and I certainly encourage them to change their plans and attend the study day. I'm looking at, as the Premier has suggested, we're compiling, or I'm getting a copy of the list of people who are actually invited. But quite frankly, because Sobeys we do recognize that they're a very valuable business entity in this province, but they operate and have for years in other jurisdictions that have first contract. And so know full well that there is no threat to the economy of this province. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the Utility and Review Board decision today, they said, and I quote, "The objective of having informed consumers is a worthwhile goal. However, the board considers that the decision of how to inform ratepayers about the impact of government regulations and programs is a policy decision to be made by the province." Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. If indeed informing Nova Scotians about the cost of government policies is a worthwhile goal, I ask the Premier, does he agree that having informed consumers is a worthwhile goal and that it is up to his government to ensure that it happens.
Honourable the Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do, and I think consumers are well informed that the reason why we have a 6.1% increase is because of a government policy, the previous government's policy of allowing us to continue to be shackled by high fossil fuel costs.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier knows full well that a broad consensus of all parties and indeed all Nova Scotians resulted in the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act that set us on a path to a renewable future that was affordable to Nova Scotians. It is his government that threw us off that path, that upset the apple cart, and made decisions that are leading to power rate increases like we see today. And so my question to the Premier is, will he ensure that the true cost of the decisions of his government with respect to power rates are made available to all Nova Scotians for them to see and judge for themselves?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't mind explaining what those advantages of those decisions are, Mr. Speaker. The advantage of the decision to move to renewables is that we have stable, long-term energy rates, Mr. Speaker, and that we are not shackled to the fossil fuel markets, the international fossil fuel markets, and face what we are facing now, which has been a 75% increase in the cost of coal over the last 6 years.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, we see the Premier in full denial again. He likes to go on about the benefits, which all Nova Scotians understand and see and agree on, but he writes a bite-the-bullet electricity plan where he won't tell them how much the cost is. And so my final question to the Premier is, why won't you be straightforward with Nova Scotians about how much your government decisions are costing them when it comes to power rates?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, our decision to pursue projects like the Lower Churchill, as good as they are for the economy of the province, are also good for the stabilization of energy rates over the long term, Mr. Speaker. That is the fundamental difference between this government and the former government. It's called vision.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism stood in this House and congratulated himself on his marketing strategy. Yet in response to question after question from our caucus, this minister can offer absolutely no proof of the jobs created. The minister stands here day after day talking about cutting checks and then warns the opposition against getting caught up in growth targets and measurable outcomes, Mr. Speaker. It is a blatant lack of accountability from this minister and the government that has resulted in thousands of jobs being lost across this province, even as the minister doles out hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars. So my question, Mr. Speaker, when will this minister provide the House with any proof of measurable results?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that this government has prided itself on, and we will continue to do that, is that this has been a tough couple of years, and we will not try to make political gain on the hardships experienced by others. I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, which is fact, is that in Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia is experiencing the lowest unemployment rate than any of the other Atlantic provinces, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Statistics Canada can provide some measurable proof to the minister. In the past year, 6,600 people in rural Nova Scotia have lost their jobs. 600 people in the Valley, 1,400 people on the North Shore, 2,100 in Cape Breton, and 2,500 people in the southern region. This is the legacy of the minister's non-strategy. 66 fewer Nova Scotians working in rural Nova Scotia. Hardly a strategy that any Nova Scotian would celebrate, Mr. Speaker. When will the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism stop celebrating job losses and get around to creating hard targets and measurable outcomes, the key to a measurable success?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we had, as the Premier has already mentioned once today, he used the word vision. Mr. Speaker, we have a vision. And through the Jobs Here strategy, Mr. Speaker, is we are fulfilling that vision. We have a strategy in place to address the shortage of jobs within the province of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. We will stick to our plan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with Lower Churchill, with the ship start here, we are 30 days into ship start here, Mr. Speaker. And as Mr. Irvin mentioned just very, very recently, is that how pleased and happy he was that this government was part of that strategy right from the get. We will continue. We will continue with our strategy, Mr. Speaker, as we move forward into the future.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Official Opposition said yesterday, quote, "We are being asked to celebrate a flimsy and weak job creation strategy without targets," end quote. The results of this feeble strategy are clear. There are 6,600 more Nova Scotians out of work in rural Nova Scotia today than there were last year. There are 9,800 fewer people in Nova Scotia looking for work than there were this time last year. Mr. Speaker, what will it take before this minister institutes hard economic targets and commits to measurable outcomes?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud as Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, and also equally proud to be a member of this government, because since we've taken over power in this province, Mr. Speaker, our unemployment rate is lower now than what it was before we came into power, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, today we learned that a new buyer for the new Page Mill will have to apply to receive the new load retention rate for power. The Premier has been giving assurances that the government would do what it can to ensure that the mill is sold to a buyer that can operate as a going concern. He said the province would aggressively work with our partners to attract a new buyer as quickly as possible. My question is to the Minister of Energy. Will the minister commit to doing everything he can to get power rates down in the future so a new buyer can afford to operate the mill?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly we're all concerned about power rates, and whether it's the largest industrial rate down to the smallest consumer, it's nobody wants to pay more than they have to, that's for sure. But I think the UARB has made a decision that's finding a balance between consumers and small business and large businesses, and as a department and as a government, we're working on energy efficiency programs, and we have a strong renewable program, so there's a combination of help here that will try to keep rates as stable as possible.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as we all know, power rates are the mill's highest costs, and power rates will be a primary concern for any new buyer. The only suggestion we've seen from the Premier to lower power rates was to ask the government's power partner, Nova Scotia Power, to lower its request for higher profits, and that was only after being pushed into it. Mr. Speaker, my question again to the Minister of Energy: did the minister review all of his government's policies to see what costs the government was adding to the power rate burden placed on our mill?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, in the past, we've taken the HST off of energy. That's a 8% saving for all consumers in the province. We're working hard with the Efficiency Nova Scotia programs to find energy efficiency programs, and the best kilowatt of energy is the one that you don't use, and that makes imminent sense. And good renewable programs around wind and tidal and biomass and hydroelectricity from our neighbours. We have a plan, we have a vision, and we're moving forward with it.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it is of vital importance to my constituency and the Strait area, and really eastern Nova Scotia and reaching out into other parts of the province, and vital importance to those worrying about the situation at Bowater Mercy, that our mills have every competitive advantage that they can have. No one wants to imagine that high costs imposed by this government could be part of the problem instead of part of the solution. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Energy is, when the Premier said he would do all he can, and the Minister supports his Premier, shouldn't that mean for the Minister to get to the bottom of these imposed costs and share them with Nova Scotians so they can decide for themselves if the Premier and his Minister are really doing all they can?
Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I outlined, we have a strong energy conservation program through Efficiency Nova Scotia. We have a strong renewable electricity vision and many good things happening there. The real reason power has gone up is that past governments have not gotten us off of fossil fuels. Coal's gone up 75% in the last 5 years. Oil is up about 70% in the last time period. And this government has a vision. I haven't seen it from past governments.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the lack of attention that this government is paying to rural Nova Scotia is costing communities jobs, and the Valley is no exception. Over the last year, our communities have felt the loss of 600 jobs, while 1,800 people exited the workforce. That does not include the recent losses at gypsum mines, at Minas Pulp and Power, areas that the minister is very familiar with. The NDP government has allowed the price of power, gas and food to continue to soar, and this is having a measurable effect on the local economy. My question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism: why is it that the only thing that we seem to be able to measure out of the minister's economic development strategy is job losses?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Annapolis Valley, as of this month, that the unemployment rate in the Annapolis Valley is 7.8%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is a lower rate than what it was with the last government, and it's a lower rate than it was with the government before that government.
The honourable member for Kings on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I know the minister is well aware of those that have actually left the workforce, those who have given up looking for jobs and headed west. Mr. Speaker, in every community, the largest concern on everyone's mind is whether or not they'll have a job tomorrow. It should be innovation, but it's simply getting by. It should be productivity, but it's making ends meet. Families should be encouraging their children to be the most creative, healthy, and imaginative they can be, yet they are worried that they will not even be able to provide a warm home and a healthy dinner. Mr. Speaker, as jobs disappear, as energy prices soar and healthy food continues to become more and more expensive, will the minister explain to families in the Valley why he's more interested in fancy logos and colorful billboards than he is in keeping them working in their communities?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I was talking to an official, a government official in the municipality of Berwick, and that official reiterated to me how happy he was working with this government with the new plant that we've been on the ground working with the municipality of Berwick to see in place there to replace some of those unfortunate job losses, Mr. Speaker. So I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, that the reports that I'm getting, and certainly from the Annapolis Valley area, from municipalities, is they're happy to be working with us. They're quite content that we are in government. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, they seem quite pleased. I think we all recognize, Mr. Speaker, that tough times, that things happen that are out of our control, and when we talk about some of those job losses, I suppose I could write a letter. I could write a letter to the President of the United States, and I could ask him to get the construction industry booming again. I could do that, but Mr. Speaker, what's the sense?
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are pleased that Berwick is starting to recover from the disaster of 400 jobs lost at Larson's. But, that's cold comfort to the 1,800 people who left the workforce in the Valley in the past year. The lack of any hard targets, measurable outcomes is pushing rural Nova Scotia to breaking point. Minister seems satisfied with clever press releases. However, the people of the Valley are far from satisfied. And I remind the House that, you know, it wasn't his appearance in Digby that brought out the crowd. It was a time to honour a great warden, Jim Thurber, that brought out the crowd, and also hoping that the minister may have an announcement for Digby. Last week, when a job went up for a clerk's job, 71 people applied for the minimum wage job. Mr. Speaker, things are desperate in places like Digby. Mr. Speaker, how many jobs will have to disappear before the minister takes concrete action on the economy? How many more jobs will be lost before we have a real strategy with hard targets and measurable outcomes?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will reiterate that in the Annapolis Valley, the unemployment rate is 7.8. Currently, that's the lowest it's been in years. Mr. Speaker, we are experiencing in Atlantic Canada the lowest unemployment rate in the Atlantic region, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during tough times we are doing this. We have a plan. We have a strategy. It is called Jobs Here.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, this government has proven they're not interested in consultation with the business community when it comes to drafting new labour legislation. Only 1 year ago, the Minister of Labour rose in this place and told us, "We believe the Labour Management Review Committee will provide an informed approach to keeping our legislation current and responsive to the needs of the labour relations community." Yet last night, Dave Fearon, Vice President of Human Resources for Sobeys, the single largest private sector employer in Nova Scotia, confirmed to members of the Law Amendments Committee that his company is not represented on the Labour Management Review Committee. Mr. Fearon went on to explain that the Labour Management Review Committee does not represent the majority of the workforce in Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education. How does the Minister expect to benefit from an informed approach when the province's single largest private sector employer has no representation on the committee?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the members of this chamber well know, the Labour Management Review Committee was set up to make recommendations and do research and consultation around the Trade Union Act and also the collective bargaining acts affecting highway workers, correction workers, and civil servants. And they certainly have been doing that. In discussions with representatives of the business community, they have admitted to me that they have been brought in terms of providing input on this piece of legislation earlier than other governments have provided. So the process is working. When there is any possibility of impact or any interest by the non-unionized sector, certainly they are able to have input and take opportunity of such things as the discussion paper, the study day, etc. So the consultation is working. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria Lakes on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, clearly Sobeys is not alone on the government's do not consult list. In March, Heather Cruikshanks of Mayor Contractors Association of Nova Scotia said the government has repeatedly refused to give non-unionized workers a voice on the Labour Management Review Committee. The Employers Roundtable, representing job creators like Michelin, Clearwater Fine Foods and Bowater Mercy, has said the LMRC should have representatives from employers and employers not represented by a union. In fact, during this presentation last evening, Mr. Fearon went on to explain that probably 80 to 85% of the workforce in Nova Scotia is not represented on the Labour Management Review Committee. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, is why has the Minister denied approximately 80% of the province's workforce representation on the Labour Management Review Committee? Is this the government's way of trying to engineer the kind of the results it wants?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure there's a lot of value in debating Bill 100 again this fall. Certainly, the Labour Management Review Committee is one of the mechanisms that government uses to get research and advice and analysis. They deal with the Trade Union Act, and as I said, I am very pleased with the way that is working. There are, believe me, hundreds, if not thousands, of other opportunities for all stakeholders in this province to consult and provide input to the government. The discussion paper was available to all Nova Scotians, all businesses, whether unionized or non-unionized. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear the government has left job creators out of the decision-making process. Their lack of consultation with them on important issues surrounding labour legislation and other matters in the province is telling. Sobeys, merit contractors, the Employers Roundtable, and countless other businesses and business advocates have expressed serious concern about the makeup of the Labour Management Review Committee and their lack of consultation. So my final question through you to the Minister, when will the Minister tell the truth and stop denying that the Labour Management Review Committee is an all-out sham designed to make it easier for the government to ram through more extreme job-killing labour laws?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure if the honourable member is suggesting that my integrity is at stake here, but I'll go back to the essence of the question. This government values the important role of business in terms of providing benefits and prosperity to Nova Scotians. We work very closely with all aspects of business. There have been many things that this government has listened to from business representatives and have implemented, and certainly the advice of some of the businesses within the construction trade were not to include Part 2, and we didn't. We were listening. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, throughout the past year, violent crime has been a serious issue in Nova Scotia and especially in the Halifax Regional Municipality. There's been an unusual amount of homicides which have taken place over the past 11 months, and the past few weeks have been no exception. Yet this government has remained silent on the issue of violent crime in our province. I repeatedly questioned the Minister of Justice on this issue during the spring session, and we still have no strategy from the government on violent crime. Speaker, considering the issue of safety is on the minds of Nova Scotians across the province, why has the Premier yet to address violent crime with a comprehensive strategy?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll take the question under advisement. I'll have the Minister of Justice respond to it on his return.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on his first supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, an issue such as violent crime is not one that we would expect that the Premier would not be aware of or would not be concerned with. Suggesting that the Minister of Justice alone should be dealing with this issue, I think, certainly is indication of how serious this government takes the issue. Speaker, earlier this month, it was reported that Halifax has suffered 6 more homicides and 9 more attempted murders so far this year over the previous year. Since that report, there's actually been other homicides and attempted murders in the city, including the murder of a senior and a double stabbing in the city as well. So, Speaker, the Premier's silence on the issue of violent crime is of no comfort to those Nova Scotians who are worried about the serious problem. So my question is, when will the Premier address violent crime prevention with a comprehensive strategy?
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we take very seriously the question of violent crime, in fact, of any crime in our community, and we're pleased to see that in many categories of violent crime, those statistics are going in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, what I can assure the member opposite of is that the Minister of Justice is working with the policing authorities right across the province to ensure that there is a comprehensive strategy, that there are appropriate assets and resources in place to ensure the safety of Nova Scotians.
The honourable member for Richmond on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, based on the cheap legislation tabled by the Minister of Justice yesterday, it's very clear that his priority is not on dealing with violent crime in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this is the same Minister of Justice who's been busy finding ways to cut back programs in his department in order to comply with the Finance Minister's budget directives. This is the government that made significant cuts to the Department of Justice at a time where Nova Scotians are looking for leadership and looking for a plan to deal with violent crime. With more incidents of violent crime, people are thinking twice about how safe they are in their own communities. Yet this government has failed to present Nova Scotians a strategy to address the issue, and they have failed to pass any legislation which would have any effect in dealing with the high rates of violent crime in our province. So my final supplementary is that what will it take before this Premier and this government finally takes the issue of violent crime seriously?
Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we take it seriously. As to legislation introduced yesterday by the Minister of Justice, I can understand why that would be a touchy subject for the member opposite and for his caucus. But, Mr. Speaker, that is not, of course, our focus. Our focus is to make sure that people in this province have the appropriate resources when it comes to policing to ensure that they are safe in their community, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Justice works both across the province and nationally with policing organizations to ensure that we have modern police forces, that they are well equipped, to ensure that we have the appropriate resources associated with not only crime prevention but crime detection. And the member opposite knows that we've just made a major investment in a new medical examiner's facility as an example of the kind of seriousness that we attach to the ability of our authorities to do their job.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Education. The HOG formula, which is used to distribute funds to school boards, is currently under review. I believe that's a good thing. Interviews have been completed. Boards have had both their high-level and their detailed presentations, and the deadline for submissions from boards in response to what they have received is November 30th, which is tomorrow. So my question to the Minister of Education is this: will the results of the current HOG formula review have any effect on the funding to boards for 2012-13?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member would know that the formula and the budget considerations are two separate things. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Thank you. It's my understanding that the HOG formula is used to distribute funds to school boards, so I'm not sure how they are different. The budget building process is well underway across all school boards in the province, but they're operating with many unanswered questions. They're still reeling, Mr. Speaker, from $36 million funding cut last year. They've heard rumors that the government is once again going to slash public education in their next budget, and they're looking for their funding targets and their preliminary profile sheets. So my question through you to the minister is this: district health authorities have information about their funding for next year. Has the Department of Education given school boards their funding targets so they can move forward with their process?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I did inform all of the school boards that when we have our budget targets, I will be going out and delivering that information to each of the school boards. We don't have that information at this time, and so therefore, as soon as we get it, the school boards will be advised. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concerns me because we know that that information is at the Department of Finance. We know that the Department of Health has received theirs. My question is why the second largest funding department in the province would not have their funding. So my question is this: boards have not been given their funding targets. They have no preliminary profile sheets. They have no idea what the review will do or what impact it will have. So my question to the minister is this: will she commit to supporting school boards in their budget building process and provide them with the information they need now?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much. As I said, when we have that information, I will be making available to all school boards. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, we were treated to the spectacle of the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism patting himself on the back and celebrating his failed job scheme. It was shocking that this minister would celebrate a fiction, call something a success when every measurable indicator proves it's a failure. For instance, last week, allnovascotia.com reported that from October 2009 to October 2011, employment throughout the province was down by 5,000, and in areas of the province outside of Halifax lost 7,900 jobs between April and June period in 2009 and the same period in 2011. Will the minister admit today that the press release statement in the House and the smiling photograph on the government's website marking 1 year of job losses was nothing more than a denial of reality and a diversionary tactic?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will say this. I say what is a diversion is when members from the opposite party take the job losses of things that are out of the control of Nova Scotians and use it for political gain, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to see one job loss in the province of Nova Scotia, but I think what is a diversion and what is completely wrong is for parties to misrepresent those numbers.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, those numbers came from allnovascotia.com. Yesterday, during his triumphant statement, the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism bragged about all the money handed out. My question is simple. What did the job scheme do to maintain or create jobs at Bow or Mersey, New Page, Minus Pulp and Power, Fundy Gypsum, Composite Atlantics, New Minus Co-op, Hurd and Windsor and Port Hawkesbury, Ed Martin Printing in Windsor, Margolians and Truro, or Signature Styles?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I do know is that in 1991, unemployment in Cape Breton peaked at 20.7%, Mr. Speaker. I know that again in 1997, it was at 26.6%, Mr. Speaker. What I also know, Mr. Speaker, is that unemployment currently today is at an all-time low compared to when either one of those parties were in power, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Statistics Canada indicates that 2,500 people in southwest Nova Scotia and 2,100 Cape Bretoners have lost their jobs since October. Will the minister deny that these people and many other Nova Scotians are struggling? Will he admit that his job scheme is doing nothing to help them?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. What I will admit to is that we are on the cusp of an economic boom in the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, with Lower Churchill, Mr. Speaker, ships start here, Mr. Speaker. We are 30 days, Mr. Speaker, into potentially 11,500 jobs just through ships here alone, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a great opportunity for Nova Scotians to live here, to come home here, to raise a family here. I would rather be nowhere else, Mr. Speaker, than right here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, the importance of upgrades to the grid cannot be understated. The Premier made an announcement in 2010, which I will table, that an upgrade would be made to the grid and lines between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. We were obviously happy that the Premier took our suggestion, since Liberals have been talking about it since 2008 and made it part of the campaign in 2009. However, we haven't heard anything about it since. So, Mr. Speaker, would the Minister of Energy provide us with an update on this important project?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, we work with our partners in Atlantic Canada. As you know, the Lower Churchill project is an important component of that, but energy ministers from the 4 maritime provinces have met regularly, looking at how we can cooperate and work together. And as you know, there's a memorandum of understanding just earlier this year to work with the province of New Brunswick on upgrading their system. And we'll continue to work with all our partners here in Atlantic Canada.
We got the vision. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Oh, no, I heard some opposition members saying good minister, but I'd be really concerned with that answer, since Amira has said that that link is critical to Muskrat Falls or any of the renewable energy targets that the government wants to talk about, and the minister can't even tell us when that might be done or what the status is, other than to say they're talking. You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that not only is that required for the Muskrat Falls project to go forward, but of course it would open the opportunity for energy from Hydro-Quebec, which would be clean energy at prices far less than what Nova Scotia is now paying. Mr. Speaker, has the minister called Hydro-Quebec to discuss the possibility of importing power from Quebec to help lower power bills for ratepayers?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know, we are always looking for the best possible buy for electrical energy in this province, and we're continuing to work with our partners. But the truth is that the infrastructure, the electrical transmission system is just not up to grade at this point in time, and it's just not possible to bring in large quantities of electricity from the province of Quebec. But certainly when the Lower Churchill project is in place, the transmission grid will be improved, will be upgraded, and then we'll be able to look at other options from other renewable sources.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I love it when the government keeps parroting that line that Amir has also already said is incorrect, that Hydro-Quebec study said that the infrastructure is in place. They said there's some upgrading needed on the Nova Scotia to New Brunswick line, but Muskrat Falls can't go ahead without that upgrading either, and the Premier is committed to that. So the fact of the matter is, if that line has to be upgraded anyhow, and I would hope the minister can actually multitask and not just work on one project, so he should be on the phone with Hydro-Quebec making those deals now. Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that the NDP has an opportunity to take action on. It would make power rates more affordable by mixing in cleaner, much cheaper power into the mix, would help meet the environmental regulations set by federal, international, and provincial regulators. So, Mr. Speaker, the job of the minister is to multitask, not just wait for Muskrat Falls to happen. So why won't he explore the Hydro-Quebec option as part of the energy solution for Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're always looking at lowest possible costs, and to further update on that, I'm going to turn this over to the Premier.
Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the member asking the question often has a problem paying attention to what actually is going on in the province, but he should know that we signed a memorandum of understanding with the New Brunswick government around the transmission upgrades. Mr. Speaker, that work is continuing. Of course, it involves not just Amera, but also, of course, the New Brunswick utility, and there are many questions associated with strengthening the regional grid. And in fact, the Minister of Energy and myself, Mr. Speaker, along with the officials from our departments, are working on all of those things in order to strengthen the energy landscape in the region, Mr. Speaker. Now, I can tell you this as well, Mr. Speaker, that once the Lower Churchill project is on is on track, Mr. Speaker, is online. That will give us the ability to also negotiate with the Quebec Hydro, and if they want to send us cheaper power, we'd be happy to take it.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. If we are shackled to fossil fuel costs, as the Premier suggests, and the NDP government has chosen an aggressive movement toward alternatives, can the Minister of Energy table the numbers his government used to make this decision?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're constantly working on our plan to get stable electricity prices in this province, and I don't have those figures right at my fingertips, but I will certainly work with my department to make those figures and stats available to the honourable member.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this one is of general interest. Can the Minister of Energy tell us how many windmills would be required to power the new Page Port Hawkesbury paper mill for the state of their operations before the hot idle?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, that's sort of a hypothetical question in many ways, because energy comes from a variety of sources. I'm not an electrical engineer, and I'm sure neither is the honourable member. And you know, that when the electricity goes on the grid and the electrons are put in there, how do you know for sure where it's coming from? And it's a complicated mix of from various sources. There's just no way to know for sure exactly where that energy is. Is it from the local windmill? Is it from the windmill at the other end of the province? Is it from hydroelectricity? Is it from biomass? Is it from tidal power? You know, who knows? These are all difficult, but I do tell you that we have a plan in this province to produce renewable electricity that will stable rates for the next number of years, and will help Nova Scotians reduce their power rates and make life more affordable for all Nova Scotian families in this province. Thank you.
Order. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you please call Bill number 115, the Labour Standards Code?
Bill number 115, the Labour Standards Code. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill 115 be now read a second time.
The question is for Bill 115 to be read a second time.
Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to rise and speak on Bill 115, the Citizenship Ceremony Leave, which contains amendments to the Labour Standards Code. This bill ensures that immigrants will be able to take time off work to attend their citizenship ceremony. Mr. Speaker, becoming a Canadian citizen is the ultimate goal of most immigrants to our country and province. Immigrants who become Canadian citizens have the same protections, rights, and responsibilities as does everyone born into Canadian citizenship. The province's immigration strategy stresses that Nova Scotia must create a welcoming environment that encourages immigrants to move, settle, and make a life here in Nova Scotia. Even relatively small gestures, like ensuring immigrants can have leave to obtain their citizenship, contribute to the development of that welcoming environment. The Labour Standards Code already provides unpaid leave in 7 specific circumstances, such as parental, family illness, compassionate, and bereavement leaves. Similarly, a person's employment would be protected while attending a ceremony to obtain their citizenship. This legislation is straightforward. It provides up to a day of unpaid leave to an employee to attend their citizenship ceremony. And it requires the employee to provide 14 days' notice to the employer, or as much notice that is possible. Mr. Speaker, an immigrant to Nova Scotia suggested the idea for such a leave. I listened and agreed it would be a good idea. In October, the Department of Labour and Advanced Education issued a discussion paper requesting feedback on the proposal. Almost all those responding agreed this was a show of support for our immigrants. Mr. Speaker, I have attended a number of citizenship ceremonies, and I have been moved by the emotion and pride shown by every immigrant as they receive their official citizenship. Sometimes they come on stage alone, sometimes with their spouse, and sometimes with their family. In every case, they are extremely proud of their achievement, which is often the end result of a long and difficult journey. Each ceremony features immigrants from around the world who have come to our province in search of a new life. Mr. Speaker, between 800 and 1,000 people in Nova Scotia become Canadian citizens every year. This legislation demonstrates the value we place on that achievement, and it is just one of the ways we are building a welcoming environment in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to hearing from the members opposite. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to just say a few words on Bill 115, which is the Labour Standards Act amended. This act, of course, as the Minister just said, allows for time off without pay to attend your own citizenship swearing in, which is a very important part of the whole process of immigration, as the Minister has said, and as many of us know from personal experience, maybe not being sworn in ourselves, but going and attending those ceremonies. And when you do attend the ceremonies for citizenship, they often, suggest and invite everybody there to take the same oath that the new Canadian is taking. And it really is a very moving ceremony, I think, even for those of us that have been raised in Canada and maybe take some of our rights for granted. And when you stand on the stage and see one after another of the new citizens crossing the stage and receiving their certificate, it's very moving to see the number of countries they come from and to recognize that each and every one of them, Mr. Speaker, has a story to tell of, reasons why they have come to Canada, and some of them are very dramatic indeed. So, we certainly think that it's important, absolutely important, that people be allowed to have time off to get to those ceremonies and to participate. I'm interested to know a little bit more about the consultation that was taken place. I did see the survey that went out, and I'm wondering if the Minister might at some other time make available the comments that were received back. That would simply help me as the critic for immigration to know whether there were further ideas that were presented or thoughts that people might have been looking for in this act. I know that we are just the second province in Canada to do this. I understand Manitoba has an act like this, and that we are following in their footsteps, and that's, I'd say in this case, a good thing, because Manitoba has been successful in their immigration efforts over the last 15 years or more. They're certainly, they got underway with intense work on this a long time before Nova Scotia did. And I'm very pleased that, that we will look at some of the things they've done that have improved immigration in their province or improved the experience for the new immigrants when they get there. But I would like to know what else might have been suggested, because it's interesting to note that close family members wouldn't be entitled to a day off to go and attend that ceremony as well. And as I said, it is a very important milestone in a person's life. I really think you can look at it the same as you would with things like days when somebody is married, and this sort of thought that this changes your life. It's a legal change in your life, and makes a big difference, and it's something you want to share with your family. So, that would be something of interest to see if there was if that was a comment raised either by the workplace, by the employers, or by others who might have been consulted in this. Mr. Speaker, I think that it's an opportunity to say a few words about immigration while we look at this, because the Minister herself has said this is a gesture towards being a more welcoming community. And I think it is important to note it's a small measure that we're talking about here today. It's not a major change. I think in some ways I was surprised that this wasn't already just widespread practice, that people and employers were not, without question, offering people the time off to go to their citizenship ceremonies. And if, in fact, this bill is before us, I have to assume that there were cases where people couldn't get the time off to travel and go to those ceremonies. So, I'm glad to see that we'll take care of that through legislation. But what I really would like to see are some other measures that come forward that will help us have a higher level of immigration. And I raised the issue and have raised the issue with the Premier in question period a couple of weeks ago about the current cap that we're under, Mr. Speaker, the cap of 500 nominees under our provincial nominee program. And many other provinces, even in our vicinity, have more of that than we do. Certainly Manitoba has many multiples of that. They're far ahead of us in the number of people they're allowed to bring in under the provincial program. And I think this is really important that we not be held back in terms of attracting and bringing new Canadians to Nova Scotia. So the cap of 500 is something that we're hoping the government will speak loudly and strongly with their counterparts in Ottawa to have that raised. Given that there is now a cap in place for all provinces, I realize it's different. But we want to see that number increase because we believe there's many more people that would come to Nova Scotia, and that we could do the marketing for that as a province and not wait for them to go through the federal system if, in fact, we had more than 500 allowed in this province. And my understanding from talking to representatives from the Office of Immigration is we won't have any problem at all reaching the 500. We're there, and we'll be able to maintain that. So we really need a higher level so that we can welcome more Canadians new Canadians to our province and increase those numbers from between 800 and 1,000 swearing in ceremonies or people being sworn in as new Canadians in Nova Scotia each year. We should be having, double and triple and more in terms of the number that we're welcoming and settling in Nova Scotia. So I hope that we'll see some other measures as well from the Minister of Immigration to help us get there and to help not only in this small way but in some bigger ways as well move us forward on the immigration agenda. And again, certainly as this bill reads and the provisions in the bill, the Liberal caucus is fully supportive. It's an important measure. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just intend to say a few words on this bill. It is one of those, of course, types of bills that, of course, we're going to support the bill. If the minister believes that enabling new Canadians to take time off for their citizenship ceremony requires an act of the legislature, then we're certainly going to support that bill, Mr. Speaker, and for many of the reasons that have just been listed. It is a very important ceremony. It's a very moving ceremony. I encourage all Canadians, new or old, to attend one or more of these new citizenship ceremonies. It's a great tribute both to our own country and to the people that have chosen to come here. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, the issue of immigration is a gigantic one for our province. As many members will know, our natural rate of population growth, the births minus deaths, turned negative for the first time this year. Without immigration, whether it's interprovincial or international, we are now faced with the prospect of outright population decline. And in fact, many regions of Nova Scotia are already depopulating. What is the government's answer today to ensure that there's time off to attend the immigration ceremonies? And as nice as that is, Mr. Speaker, it only scratches the surface of what needs to be done. I am aware that there is an immigration strategy. My criticism of it, Mr. Speaker, is by far too modest. That if we truly want to take advantage of the shipyard opportunity, if we truly want to build a modern, dynamic, growing economy, that we need to do far more than raise the targets by a modest few percentage points and make sure that people can have time off to go to the ceremony. Mr. Speaker, we need a big, bold,